Hello, Caleb. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Jared. How are you?
I am doing pretty well. We have some letters in the mailbag to look at today. I printed them out for you, and you've got them there in front of you. One of them is a review from Apple Podcasts. Do you want to read that one?
Yeah, really nice. This listener, Jayhawk023, says, I've been listening for a little over a year now. This has become one of my favorite podcasts. The insight offered by Jared and his guests have renewed my spirit and reminded me why I wanted to be a police officer in the first place. Thank you for all your hard work putting this show together. It's much needed for so many of us.
And I don't know for sure who that is. I was looking at the username they put in and trying to deduce, like, ooh, is this somebody that I know? And I'm not sure. It could be. I can think of a few candidates, but I'm not sure. They wrote that anonymously, and I really, really appreciate that, especially where they put in, a 5-star rating and they wrote a nice review. Man, that really helps when people go find the show at random and then they see dozens and dozens of 5-star reviews. That is pretty nice.
We really appreciate those so much. And keep on sending in those reviews and giving a 5-star rating.
And then I also have another function where if people look at the show notes or the episode description, my web host puts in a link that you can hit that says text the show. And you can send a text message, actually goes to my web host, Buzzsprout, and they get a text, and then I see it in my app. I can't respond to the text. It's not like you're actually texting me directly, but they call it fan mail. And it's a nice way to send a message to the show. I do see that immediately. My brother actually sent me one when it was very first turned on. And I know it was him because he told me to protect everybody's privacy. It doesn't actually give me your phone number. It just tells me what city you're from. And so you need to write who you are if you want to identify yourself. So my brother Dustin wrote here, this was, 6 months ago, he wrote, enjoyed episode number 83. Learning about a career transition is interesting to me because I'm learning a new job as well. I appreciate that. It was a nice test of the system, but I have a more recent one for you to read, Caleb.
Yeah. This person writes, hello, I've been doing law enforcement for about 13 years now. I feel like God has started to place it on my heart for a possible police chaplain role after retiring, a long way off, but here before you know it. Would I need something like a master's in divinity and or counseling training to go that route? Thanks in advance, Gus. So this is Gus from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Gus, thank you for writing in. Thank you for listening to the show. I really appreciate that. I'm glad it had an impact on you. And I think we can kind of answer your question. Here's the problem. It depends. Isn't that awful every time you get get that as an answer? It depends. Because every agency, local, state, and federal, are all going to have different requirements and different expectations of what they think a chaplain is or what they think a chaplain should do for them. And so there are places that are going to have almost no prerequisites. If you are willing, that is the prerequisite. That's all that they need.
Right. They just need a warm body who wants to be there.
Is willing to show up. Yep. And really very little else. I mean, really, they might walk down to the local church and ask the pastor there, hey, will you be our chaplain in case we ever need one? And they don't maybe fully understand what a chaplain could do for them, but that's just the situation it is. So sometimes the requirements are very, very minimal. Other times, they're going to want advanced degrees in theology. They're going to want counseling experience. They're going to want CPE. And I think that we can kind of describe what each of those are. So to start with, it helps to be ordained clergy. You don't have to be Christian. You don't have to be Protestant or Catholic. It can be, you can be Buddhist or Muslim or Jewish or whatever, but it helps to be ordained clergy. To be ordained, some groups require quite a bit of education. And so you might have had to go to Bible college or to seminary. Caleb, you went to seminary and got an MDiv, which is what he mentioned, a master's in divinity.
That's correct. Yes, that's right. I went and pursued, that master's degree. The MDiv is kind of a very standard degree for those who are wanting to pursue, higher education in order to practice ministry, do vocational ministry. Now, it's not quite like your normal master's degree. If you're thinking of a master's in education, that's somewhere around 36 hours. Usually an MDiv is somewhere between 75 and 90 hours. It's very
lot more work.
Involved. It takes probably 3 to 5 years, depending on how you go about it. But even that ordination process you talked about, that's another one of those it depends things too, isn't it? Because it totally depends on your denomination. Some denominations have these very strict requirements, like here is how we do things. It's a year-long process. You need to take these particular courses or do this particular training and have these kinds of interviews. Whereas some other denominations, it might be, we know your character, we know your background already, we know your qualifications. We just want you to have a couple of relaxed, more informal meetings with the church leadership or elders, and then they can give you their blessing to become an ordained minister of the church. Yeah.
I was ordained to do missionary work before I went to Bible college. Then I did Bible college, so I did all of my kind of seminary-like training at the undergrad level, and I did that, and then I was ordained again to serve in the church. And so I've been ordained multiple times, and I had an undergrad level Bible training. And so all my training and my counseling and in theology and all that kind of stuff came at the undergrad level for me. Some agencies are going to be fine with that. Others are going to be like, no, we want that master's level. We want an advanced degree. They might even ask for more. It's hard to say. But there's another track that you can take besides going to seminary.
Right.
What's that?
Well, Gus mentioned counseling or some other kind of training, and you brought up something called CPE. That stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. Typically, it's going to be through a hospital, primarily, because most hospitals have networks of chaplains.
Yeah.
And this is a way for you to gain experience in helping others pastorally and spiritually.
So is it the primary way to train hospital chaplains?
I believe that is the case.
Okay.
Yes. I don't have a ton of personal experience with this, but I do have a little bit. Part of my Master's of Divinity degree, specifically at my seminary, they wanted us to have a little bit of practical ministry experience.
They wanted you to have a taste of CPE, didn't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could do a full, what's called a unit of CPE, or you could do what I did, which was something a little bit lighter. They called it the Clinical Supervised Ministry Experience. And so for me, I did this over the course of one summer. I had to have 100 hours of clinical time, meaning I'm spending time with patients in their rooms, ministering to them. And then there was like a 3-hour-a-week course for a couple of months during the summer. And so I think all told, it was like 150-ish hours. And it was all just to get your feet wet. And for me, it represented 3 hours of credit for my 90-hour degree program. But a CPE unit is a little more involved than that. It is 400 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. So a unit of CPE requires 3 hours of those clinicals where you're with the patients, and then 100 hours of instruction, typically by one of the hospital chaplains, as I understand it. That's how it worked for me anyway. There's also 4 levels to CPE. So a person could just say, I'm going to do 1 unit of CPE, get that under my belt, and have this experience and be able to take that. But some people want to be able to really immerse themselves into this and hopefully be, certified. By
especially if they think, I'd like to get a paying position as a chaplain at a hospital.
Right. And that's where
you're going to pursue more units of CPE if you're going for that, because those are good jobs, but there's not a lot of them.
That's precisely right. I think a person who wants to be like a paid chaplain on staff at a hospital has to do a minimum of 4 units of CPE to be certified. And like you said, most paid chaplaincy positions, particularly at hospitals, are going to require this. And it can become kind of almost a full-time job while you're trying to get that kind of training. If you want to do that level,
Yes.
There are entire cohorts where you do it for a year, and every 3 months essentially is one of those units or levels of CPE. They might give you like a stipend or something while you're doing it, but it's not a lot. You're basically an intern.
Right.
And when it comes to chaplaincy in general, I know Gus was asking about police chaplaincy. There are only so many chaplaincy jobs that pay, right? Many chaplains, such as police and firefighter chaplains, are strictly volunteer.
Yeah. Very commonly. It's rare to find a paid position for a first responder chaplain.
Right. Yeah. But you have to keep in mind that even the paid chaplaincy positions are not typically super high paying. You might be able to make a living off of it, but there might only be a few openings in your immediate area. I was at Johnson City Medical Center when I was doing this clinical supervised ministry experience, and I think there were 4 full-time chaplains at a level 1 trauma center. That was the major hospital in the area.
Yeah, big hospital, just 4 of them.
Right. Yeah. And so there's only going to be so many openings at any given time, but it can be, for people who want it, a really good training and education in order to be able to help others. And I really think it's a calling, right?
Yeah.
Chaplaincy is all about working with people that you don't know who are in a moment of crisis. And I knew that wasn't for me. That wasn't the route that I wanted to go. I wanted to work with the same people week in and week out for years on end.
Yeah, in the church setting.
Right. Yeah. But it might be your calling.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this.
And I know several law enforcement chaplains who the CPE units was the training that they took. They even worked maybe as a hospital chaplain part-time or as kind of like intern type position as they were doing CPE, so that they could get the requisite experience and have the credentials to then approach a law enforcement agency and say, yes, I want to be a law enforcement chaplain now. And so I know all of the ones I know talk about it highly. They said they learned a lot about themselves, felt like it was a good training, and then they didn't want to really work in the hospital. That was just how they got the CPE, so they could turn around and say, hey, I am a qualified person to be a chaplain at your sheriff's office.
It's a way to get the foot in the door a little bit.
Yes.
We even have an elder at our church who sort of received a call to ministry a little bit later in life. And
retired Air Force.
Yeah. And while maintaining his full-time job, he pursued an MDiv online. And then I'm pretty sure he went and did a bunch of CPE and now serves as a hospital chaplain. I think it's on a volunteer basis, though I think he'd like it to be his full-time job eventually.
Right. Yeah. So all of those, Bible college, seminary, CPE, all of those are reasonable things to pursue, both to get ordained in the first place and then also to become a law enforcement chaplain. But none of it makes you a great chaplain. You have to have education, but you also have to have experience. You also have to have talent. You also have to have wisdom. All of those things kind of go together. And I know great law enforcement chaplains who have just the bare minimum of any of that we were talking about. And I know other chaplains and have heard of chaplains who have extraordinary educational qualifications and just enough degrees to plaster their walls, but they have no aptitude for the job. And so wherever you go to serve, I feel like there needs to be a calling. I feel like there needs to be a sense of purpose. There should be some aptitude for it, which you may or may not be able to acquire. You might just have to have that. And then the training and experience and that kind of stuff comes together. When you're looking to get brought on to an organization, to a chaplains association, a specific agency, they may have certain requirements, and it would be smart to ask them, are you looking for an MDiv? Are you looking for CPE? They might have a very specific requirement.
Especially if you're in the position of the listener who wrote in, if you're thinking about that well in advance.
15 years from now.
That's a good thing to know about, because some of these things, like getting a master's in divinity or taking units of CPE, they take real time and investment.
Yeah.
So it's not something you just do on a whim.
Right. And so if you know, hey, the local state troopers, they won't take anybody without 3 units of CPE, or they won't take somebody without going to seminary first. You should find that out, and you can be working on that. And going through that, I really do think you'll find out a lot about yourself and how you respond to other people's suffering, and also whether you feel you really are called to go to people in their moment of trauma and tragedy. And sometimes that's a good fit, sometimes it's not. And so that's a chance for you to kind of explore that as you're being trained, as you're being educated, and find out whether or not this is going to be a good fit for you. Yeah, I really feel like for me, the thing that makes me effective as a chaplain wasn't my education as much as it was the 20 years I served in the church before I started chaplaincy. And so I feel like my chaplaincy makes me a more effective minister in the church, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I'm glad I went to Bible college. I think it's very important, but really it was those practical lessons and the practical experience that I think makes me effective. So it's going to be different for everybody. And beware of gatekeepers who are like, well, if you don't have your PhD, then we're not going to talk to you. Sometimes if that's what you run into, just go somewhere else. Just find a different agency to work for, because you probably don't even want to mess with somebody who's doing that kind of gatekeeping.
The Ivory Tower Institute.
Yeah. There's folks who feel like the route they took is the only route that can be taken, and they won't lower themselves to consider anybody else. I just walk away. There are plenty of agencies out there that don't have anybody, and they would be happy to take you and the qualifications that you do have. So just look around a little bit more if you run into a gatekeeping kind of stonewall situation. So yeah, if all of this formal education sounds like a bit much,
if doing 400 hours of a CPE unit sounds a little intimidating,
right, you could dip your toe in the water by doing some of the training that is available. There is local, regional, and national training organizations that will train you to be a chaplain, and they might offer an 8-hour class or a 40-hour class, and you'd spend a week learning all kinds of stuff about crisis counseling and critical incident stress management and all kinds of topics that are relevant to a law enforcement or first responder chaplain. And if you do that, which might be all a local agency might want, is just that you would do some training each year. If you do that, then you would know, oh yes, this is my thing, and I want to go get an advanced degree in it, or I want to go do CPE also. That would be, a much bigger investment, but maybe just going to those trainings would be a good way to do it. And some of those trainings are kind of a depending on the group, a certification that might be recognized by an agency, and like, oh, you went through training with FEMA and Red Cross and Billy Graham Association and all these different groups that do chaplain training. They may look at that and say, oh, well, that's all we needed was just this training that you went to a week of training somewhere.
Yeah, that could be a good first step.
Yep, absolutely. Right. Thank you, Caleb. Have a wonderful day. And thank you to Gus and my brother Dustin and JHog023 for writing in. I genuinely appreciate it. And if you would please go to the show notes, the episode description, and click on that link that says text a message to the show and send me a comment or a question through that fan mail feature. If you want to be identified, you'll have to write that in, the actual message, but send that message. I'll receive it immediately. I won't be able to respond to you in real time, but I might read your comment or your question on a future episode. Remember that the views expressed here are the personal views of the hosts and our guests and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. And if you like this episode, share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop or someone who's considering becoming a chaplain so that they can love cops even better. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain. And as always, pray for peace in our city.
He just was like, yeah, like you really need to do that, man. I was just hammering down on it. And I had already done the CSME thing and knew, like, I'm good. I got my taste and it was a good experience, but I don't need any more. Right. And I was kind of like, yeah, that's fine. I don't really think that's the route for me. And he just kept going on and on and on. I'm like, man, you're like one track mind. You're thinking this is the route every single human being needs to go. But
well, they came across
seem...
some great advice, and I think everybody needs it. Right. Yeah.
Right.
It's yeah. There's also
I don't think everybody should go pursue an MDiv, even though it was good for me. But that's
right.
Yeah. Every Christian needs to have a master's degree in theology.
No, that can't be right, because every Christian needs to go to Bible college, like what I did.
That's right. Exactly right.